The first time I did not answer him, I was 24, and I was standing at the kitchen window watching the last light go out of a February field. There was a kettle on the stove that had already whistled twice. There was a lamp on the table with the wick trimmed too low, so the flame kept guttering sideways like it was trying to lie down. There was a plate of cold ham on the counter that I had cut too thick because my hands had been shaking for reasons I could not yet name. He asked me a question from behind me. A small one, an ordinary one. The kind of question a husband asks a wife at the end of a long day, I couldn't. And I did not answer. I did not turn around. I did not shake my head. I simply kept my eyes on the seam where the sky met the snow. And I let the silence come in the way I'd watched silence come into 100 other rooms in my life, and I felt for the first time what it was like to be on the other side of that silence. I felt the temperature of the kitchen drop 3 degrees. I felt the shape of what was about to happen the way you feel a storm coming through a window sash. And I stayed there anyway, because I had already learned that winter what Amish husbands do to wives who stop answering. I had learned it the way Amish women always learn things. Quietly, sideways, too late to leave without paying. My name is Martha. This is the Amish Stories, the channel where I tell you the stories the buggies never carry back down the lane. I grew up Old Order Amish in Holmes County, Ohio, on a farm at the end of a dirt road that had no name on any map that mattered. I was married at 19, and I left at 26. And there are 7 years between those two numbers that I am still, all these years later, learning how to put into sentences. If this is the kind of story you have been looking for, the kind that does not shout, the kind that lets you sit in the room with me, go ahead and subscribe and hit the little like button because it tells the algorithm that quiet stories are worth caring too. And tell me in the comments. Before we go further, have you ever been taught in words or in weather that a woman's silence was the price of her belonging? Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me what your mother taught you about a woman's yes and a woman's no. I read every single one of your comments. I mean that. It is one of the things I do now that I could not do then. Here's the thing about the Ordnung, the code we lived by. It is not written down. It is not printed and bound and passed hand to hand. It lives in the air of a house. It lives in the way your mother's back stiffens when the bishop's wife pulls into the drive. It lives in what a father does not say at supper. It is a law you learn the way you learn the smell of wood smoke or the sound of your own horse in the barn, by living inside it long enough that you forget there is any other kind of air. Above the Ordnung sits the bishop. Above the bishop sits God. Below the bishop sits the husband. Below the husband sits the wife. Below the wife sit the children, and below the children sits the ground you will one day be buried in a plain pine box, in a dress you sewed yourself. That is the hierarchy. That is the shape of the world I was born into. And the mortar that holds the whole structure standing is a word that outsiders almost never hear us say out loud. Gelassenheit. Yielding. The soil yields to the plow, the field yields to the season, the wife yields to the husband yields to the bishop yields to God. And everyone, at every level, is supposed to yield so quietly that the yielding cannot be heard from the road. In the outside world, when a woman is unhappy in her marriage, she has words for it. She has a friend she can call. She has a mother who will drive across a state line. She has, if she is very lucky, a therapist and a bank account and a door that opens onto a street with her own name on the mailbox. In my community, a woman who was unhappy in her marriage had a garden. She had a quilt frame. She had a pantry to organize. She had, if she was very lucky, a sister who understood without asking, and a proverb she could repeat to herself while she was scrubbing the floor. A wife who lets the cold in cannot complain when the house freezes. Everyone knows, no one says. That was the rule that governed everything else. There was no official name for what began happening to me the winter I was 24, but it existed the way many things in Amish life exist. Without a name, without a signature, without a witness who would ever admit to seeing it. My husband's name was Jonas. I want you to hear that name and understand something before I go any further. Jonas was not a monster. I need to say that now, at the beginning, because I am going to tell you what he did, and I know how it will sound in a language that does not have our weather in it. Jonas was a man raised inside the same silence I was raised inside. He was 22 when we married, and I was 19, and we had known each other since we were children in the same church district, singing from the same Ausbund, sitting on opposite sides of the same barn during services. He courted me the way Amish boys court Amish girls. He walked me home from a Sunday singing on a night when the fireflies were out over the hayfield, and he did not say much, and what he said was gentle. He was a good farmer. He kept his tools oiled. He was kind to his horses. When my father asked what kind of man he was, my father said only, "He is a man who finishes what he starts." In our world, that was the highest praise a man could receive. We were married on a Thursday in late October, when the walnut leaves had already gone. There were nearly 300 guests. There were 4 hours of preaching. There was roast chicken and creamed celery and 7 kinds of pie cooling on a long trestle table in the shed. And my mother had cried once, briefly, into her apron while she was arranging the pies. And I had not asked her why, because I already knew even then, at 19, that a mother's tears at a daughter's wedding were not a question you asked out loud. Our first child came the following August, a boy. We named him after Jonas's grandfather. He had my mouth and Jonas's hands, and I loved him with a completeness that surprised me, and by the time he was walking, I was already carrying the next one. And by the time the next one was born, I was 22 years old, and I had not slept a full night in 3 years, and I had begun, in ways I did not yet have language for, to feel like a body that had been working a long time. The inciting thing, when it finally came, was so small I'm almost embarrassed to name it. I said, "One night, not tonight." 3 words, 1 sentence. I was tired the way you can only be tired when you have been nursing a baby who does not sleep and cooking 3 meals a day for a family that grows by one every 18 months and washing clothes on a wringer in a cellar in February. I said the 3 words gently. I said them the way you would say them to a friend. I said, "Not tonight, Jonas. I am so tired." And I turned toward the wall and I closed my eyes and I waited. I waited for him to be angry. I waited for him to argue. I waited for anything at all. What I got was nothing. Nothing that night. Nothing the next morning at breakfast. Nothing at noon dinner. Nothing at supper. He did not raise his voice. He did not slam a door. He did not refuse to eat the food I set in front of him. He simply stopped speaking to me the way a man stops speaking to a wife who has done something the community has already agreed in advance cannot be spoken of directly. 3 days. 4 days. On the 5th day, I said his name at breakfast, in front of the children, and he looked at me the way you look at the weather through a window. Polite, distant, unconcerned with what it was doing on the other side of the glass. That was tier 1. That was the first temperature drop. That was the beginning of what I now know is called, in the outside world, coercive control, but what we called, when we called it anything, simply the way of things. On the 7th day, my mother came. She came in the middle of a Tuesday morning, which was not her way. She did not ask why I looked the way I looked. She sat down at my kitchen table and she took the peas I was shelling out of my hands and she began to shell them herself. And while she shelled, she said, without looking at me, "A wife who lets the cold in cannot complain when the house freezes, Martha. A house needs its warmth." She said it the way she would have said it about the weather. She kept shelling. She did not stay for coffee. When she left, the bowl was full of peas, and I was crying into the sink. And I understood that a message had been delivered, and that my mother had been sent to deliver it, and that she had cried, herself, on the buggy ride over because she loved me, and she also could not save me, and both of those things were true at the same time. Then came the sister-in-law with a plate of chouflé pie and a long, slow conversation about a woman 2 districts over whose husband had, quote, grown tired. Then came the bishop's wife, unannounced, on a Thursday, with a length of blue fabric she said she had been meaning to bring by, and she sat in my front room and she looked at my children and she said gently, "Children need a peaceful house, Martha. A peaceful house is a mother's work." Then came the quilting frolic at Rebecca Zook's, where an older woman named Lydia Miller, who was 68 then, and had buried 2 husbands and 1 baby, and had hands like leather from 70 winters of gardens, sat down beside me on the bench and did not look at me and threaded her needle 3 times before she spoke. She said, and I remember this the way you remember the exact shape of a bruise. She said, "They do not hit us, Martha. That is not our way. What they do is harder." She kept her eyes on the quilt. She pulled the thread through and pulled it taut. She said, "The cold can stay in a house for a very long time, longer than a man's arm ever could. I have watched it. I have watched women grow old inside that cold." She did not say anything else. She stood up after a while and she went to help with the coffee. And she did not sit beside me again that day. And 3 months later, she died in her sleep on a March night. And I went to her funeral, and I stood at the back of the barn, and I understood that she had given me something before she went. She had given me a sentence. She had given me the sentence I had needed since I was 19 years old, and no one had ever said it out loud to me before. If you have stayed with me this far, thank you. I know these stories are not the easy kind. I know they ask something of you. If they are giving you something back, subscribe to the channel, because there is so much more I have not yet said, and the algorithm listens for the quiet ones only when you tell it to. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had a Lydia? Have you ever had one older woman in one room on one afternoon tell you sideways the thing no one had been willing to tell you straight? The bishop came in the 11th week. He came on a Sunday afternoon, which is how bishops come, after the service in the good light with the whole community already told. He sat in my front room in the good chair. There was a slice of apple pie on the windowsill behind him that my mother-in-law had brought over that morning, and the steam had long since stopped rising off it. And I remember staring at that pie the whole time he spoke, because if I stared at the pie, I did not have to look at his beard. He did not raise his voice. Bishops never raise their voices. He said, "We do not want to lose you, Martha." He said, "A woman's body, inside a marriage, is not a thing she owns separately." He said refusal over time is a form of pride. Pride, he said, is hokmut, and hokmut is the sin that closed the gates of heaven to the angels who fell. He said, "We are praying for you." He drank his coffee. He ate the pie. He left the plate on the windowsill with the fork resting on the rim. And I understood, sitting there in that warm room after he had gone, that I had just been warned in the softest voice a man can use, and that the next voice, if there was a next voice, would not be soft. I want to tell you about the night I knew. I want to tell you carefully because it was not dramatic, and I do not want to give it a shape it did not have. It was a Tuesday in late March. There had been a thaw and then another freeze, and the yard was that ugly gray-brown that Ohio yards get before spring finally decides. I was hanging laundry on the porch line because the cellar line was full. I had hung 4 of Jonas's shirts in a row, and I was reaching into the basket for the 5th, and I stopped. I stopped with my hand in the basket. I looked at the row of shirts. 5 men's shirts, blue, gray, blue, black, blue. All the same cut, all the same collar, all the same size. And I understood, without any drama at all, that I had been hanging that same row of shirts every Monday and every Thursday for 6 years, and that if nothing changed, I would hang that same row of shirts every Monday and every Thursday for another 40 years, and that when I died, someone else would take the shirts down. It was not a thought, it was a knowing. It arrived the way you know a season has changed. You do not decide, you simply notice one morning that the light is different. I finished hanging the shirts. I went inside. I made supper. I put the children to bed. I did not tell anyone. I did not cry. I sat on the edge of our bed that night in the dark and I said, in my head, not out loud, the 3 words I had said months before, and I understood that they had never been about a single night at all. They had been the first sentence of a whole language I did not yet know I was learning. I will not tell you the story of the leaving today. That story belongs to a different video because it deserves its own room. I will tell you only that I left in May with 1 suitcase and the egg money I'd been saving for 11 years in a mason jar in the corner of the loft behind a bale of straw. I walked to the phone shanty at the corner of Township Road 62 at 4 in the morning while my children slept. I called a woman named Anna, who had left the Swartzentruber Church 12 years before and now lived in a small brick house in Worcester, and had told me once at a farmer's market without ever making eye contact, if you ever need to make a phone call at 4 in the morning, this is the number. Anna picked me up in an old blue station wagon. She did not ask me why. She drove me 40 miles east and gave me a bed in a room that smelled like lavender, and I slept for 14 hours. And when I woke up, I was, for the first time in my adult life, in a room where no one knew where I was. The shunning came, of course. It came the way a shunning always comes. Through the mail, through the returned letters, through the phone calls that rang into rooms no one would enter. My mother wrote to me once. Her letter came back to me 6 months later with a note in my father's handwriting. She is not to write again. And I put that letter in a box, and I did not open the box for 4 years. I saw my mother one more time from across a parking lot in Berlin, Ohio, in the fall of the second year. She was coming out of the bulk food store. She saw me. She looked at me for exactly the length of time it takes a woman to draw one breath. And then she turned her head and got into her sister's buggy and did not turn back. My father, when I saw him at a distance at a farmer's market some years later, looked through me the way you'd look through a window that is not clean, like I was made of glass, like the light was going through me and landing on something behind. I do not blame them. I need you to hear me say that. They were doing what they had been taught by the only people who had ever taught them anything was the thing that would save my soul. Their grief for me was real. Their love for me did not stop. It simply had to be carried in a way I could not receive, because to receive it, I would have had to walk back into the house that had frozen me out, and I could not do that, and they could not come out of it. And so we stood on either side of a door that was not technically locked, and neither of us could open it. And that is a kind of grief the outside world does not have very good words for either. The therapist came in the third year. Her name was Diane. She had a small office on the second floor of a building above a coffee shop in Akron. She had beige walls and a jade plant and a pair of reading glasses she was constantly losing on top of her own head. She was maybe 5'2". She was patient the way a woman is patient when she has decided, professionally, that patience is a form of love. And in the second month, on a Wednesday afternoon when the light was coming in her window sideways, she said to me the sentence that finally gave shape to 7 years of my life. She said, "Martha, what you are describing is called coercive control." She said, "Consent that is not consent. Because the cost of saying no has been made, unbearable is not consent." She said, "Emotional withdrawal used as punishment is a form of harm, even when no hand is ever raised." She said, "The most effective systems of control are the ones that feel exactly like love, because inside them you cannot tell the difference, and neither can the people enforcing them." She said, "A community that cannot hold your questions does not actually trust its own answers." She said, "Consent is not a door you walk through once at an altar. It is a door you walk through every single day for the rest of your life, and both people have to keep opening it, or it is not a door anymore. It is a wall." I sat in her office and I cried the way I had not cried in the 11 weeks between the 3 words and the bishop's visit. I cried the way I had not cried on the porch with the shirts, or in the phone shanty at 4 in the morning, or in Anna's lavender bedroom, or on any of the 100 nights since. I cried because someone, finally, in a beige room above a coffee shop in a city that had nothing to do with any field I had ever hung laundry over, had given me the word for what had happened to me. And the word was not sin. And the word was not pride. And the word was not a wife who let the cold in. I want to be careful here. I want to say this the way it needs to be said. Jonas was not a monster. He was a man raised inside the same silence I was raised inside. He did what he had been shown by his father and his father's father, was the way a husband corrects a wife whose refusal has begun to threaten the shape of the house. He did not know another way. He was not given another way. When I picture him now all these years later, I do not picture a villain. I picture a boy of 22 on a Thursday in October in a black suit that did not quite fit at the shoulders, standing in front of 300 people, promising in front of God and the bishop and his own trembling mother to be the head of a house he had never been taught how to lead with anything other than the tools he had been handed. He used the tools he was given. The tools were the problem. The framework was the mistake, not the boy. I do not hate the Amish. I need to say that too. My community gave me things I still carry. It gave me hands that know how to work. It gave me a body that knows how to be quiet with weather. It gave me sisters I still dream about, in the good dreams and the bad ones. And it gave me a faith in something larger than myself that I have not, all these years later, entirely put down. The system is the thing. The people are inside the system the same way I was inside the system. The silence is load bearing. The silence is architecture. You cannot pull one wall out and expect the roof to hold. That is why leaving is so hard. That is why so few of us do. That is why the ones who stay are not weak. They are surviving inside a house that was built on purpose to make sure that leaving would cost more than most women could afford to pay. So, here, at the end of a story, I did not know how to tell for a very long time, is what I want to say to you. If you ever grew up in a place where your body was not treated like a thing that belonged to you first, I see you. If you ever lay in the dark beside someone and said yes because you were too tired to survive what a no was going to cost you, I see you. If you ever said three small words to a person who had authority over you and watched the temperature of the room drop for weeks afterward, I see you. If you were ever told, in words or in weather, that being a good woman meant making yourself smaller and smaller until there was nothing left of you to refuse with, I see you. If you have a Lydia in your life, an older woman who once said one sentence sideways at a kitchen table and cracked open a door you did not know was there, I see her too, and I hope you have thanked her. And if she is gone, I hope you carry her name. If you have not left yet and you are watching this at 4 in the morning in a house where everyone else is asleep, I see you the most. You are not weak. You are not weak now. You are surviving inside a system that was built brick by brick and silence by silence to make sure you could not refuse without paying for it. The fact that you are still here, still asking the question, still watching a stranger tell a story that sounds a little like your own, that is not weakness. That is the first sentence of your own leaving, whether the leaving ever happens in the outside world or only in the country of your own mind. Tell me in the comments, what part of this story stayed with you? Tell me your Lydia's name if you had one. Tell me the three words you have been afraid to say out loud to a person who had authority over you. Tell me your own story if you are ready. I read every single one. I mean that. It is the closest thing to a quilting frolic I have left. Subscribe to the Amish stories if you have not already. There is so much more I have not yet said. There are stories about the pre-wedding rooms our mothers did not prepare us for, and the bishops who came in warm parlors with pie on the windowsill, and the sisters I have not spoken to in almost 20 years. I will tell them, one at a time, in the only voice I have, which is the one I finally learned to use. Until next time, choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life. Your no is a whole sentence. It always was. Your body is yours. It was yours before you spoke any vow. And the silence, however long it has been load-bearing in the house you were born into, is not the roof. You are the roof. You always were.